So as you guys probably know, Nahida is getting her first ever rerun banner in the first half of version 3.6. Because of that, I want to talk about Nahida and cover the commonly asked questions that I get regarding her power level. Is she really broken? Is she a must-pull character? As well as her place in the meta and flexibility in many different teams, covering her builds, playstyles, and overall strength as a character. It's no secret that Dendro teams are very strong right now, and that the Dendro Archon, Nahida, definitely does level them up, but how valuable is she? Is she replaceable? Or is she a character that you should be spending your Primogems on, depending on which type of player you are? And so in order to answer those questions, I want to start by covering Nahida's power level as a whole, and talk about her role as a character, and whether or not what she does is actually as valuable as people say. Well, first things first, I want to make it clear that Nahida's kit is basically just jam-packed with a ton of utility, damage, and Dendro application. In fact, her elemental skill is an ability that has pretty much unlimited range that will mark enemies and constantly apply Dendro and deal Dendro damage to them. This is incredibly valuable for Dendro reactions, as her Dendro application from off-field is second to none, and she can also be used on-field as well because of the fact that she's a catalyst, which makes her not only a powerful off-field support, but also a viable on-field driver in teams that need more Dendro application. If that wasn't enough, she also has an elemental burst that will give you a pretty big amount of buffs just from its effect, depending on the elements you run in your team. It will also give you elemental mastery to your active character, with the amount it gives scaling with the elemental mastery of your party member that has the most elemental mastery, which is typically going to be Nahida, except in a Nilou team, but we'll talk about that later, which means that she's a character who not only applies a ton of Dendro, has genuinely good damage, and also gives you a significant amount of buffs. Now, if that wasn't enough, she also generates a ton of energy throughout her skill, just passively as you're proccing reactions, as your elemental skill, if you don't know, will proc every single time you trigger an elemental reaction, dealing Dendro damage, giving you particles, and also reapplying Dendro. If all of that wasn't enough, you will also gain a bonus amount of damage and crit rate from your passive talent based on your elemental mastery that your Nahida has, which means that she gets a bunch of benefits from stacking elemental mastery and also benefits from stacking damage, making her very easy to build. But again, more on that a bit later when I'll go into more detail on her builds and her flexibility in that regard. And so because of all these factors, Nahida is going to be a staple in any Dendro team that wants either an off-field support or that can use an on-field Dendro applier. If you don't have anyone that can really fill in the downtime of your rotation, Nahida can honestly just be fine to auto attack on, while also being an amazing off-field option. Now with that said, when you compare her to other Dendro supports, how good is she, and is she a must pull? Well, first things first, I believe it's very important for me to reiterate a belief that I've always had in Genshin, which is that no character can really be deemed a must pull because of the fact that we don't have actual endgame content that warrants the most investment. The current Spiral Abyss, while it is difficult, I have cleared with only 4-star characters or free-to-play accessible ones like the Dendro main traveler, who are all going to work fine and be a valid replacement to Nahida, for example, if you don't have her. With that said, she's definitely going to be a big upgrade because not only does she apply more Dendro, deal more damage, and give your team more significant buffs, but she also doesn't have any of the drawbacks like characters like the Dendro Traveler has, where the Dendro Traveler has this weird sort of range where you have to stay within the circle of her burst, and also if your Dendro main Traveler's burst gets hit by Pyro a single time, it'll explode and then you just lose all your Dendro. So other characters do have their downsides, but Nahida can be replaceable. Like DMC is a fine option, and Yao Yao is a really good Dendro healer that in something like a Quicken team where you don't need that much Dendro application, yes, Nahida is still really good, but Yao Yao can be a perfectly viable replacement, especially if you need a healer alongside your Sino, Alhaitham, or other carry. With that said though, Nahida is pretty much as broken as it gets. Like genuinely, I believe that the most valuable 5-star characters right now are Nahida and Kazuha, with both of them, yes, still being replaceable and not absolutely necessary to your accounts. But if you are pulling for meta and want a character that is really strong in pretty much any team you can use them in, then Nahida is definitely going to be a character that fills that role. With that said, the main downside I could say about Nahida is that in content where there's going to be multiple waves of enemies, you're going to have to remark the enemies with Nahida. Once you mark them, since Nahida's mark is the main part of her kit, that's her elemental skill that will constantly apply Dendro to them, if you're swapping to a character like Sino that needs a lot of field time and you kill the enemies that are marked, when new enemies spawn, you're going to have to swap out of your active character, swap out of your Sino to remark them with Nahida. While that typically isn't a problem in many quick swap style teams where you're switching between characters non-stop, if you're playing a carry that needs to stay on field for a long time, like Sino or even Alhaitham, then swapping out of them can feel a bit awkward if you just want to reapply your mark on Nahida. Generally, this isn't that big of an issue, but it is something you do need to keep in mind for certain teams against certain types of content. Other than that though, she's pretty much bar none the best Dendro character, at least from off-field in any team, and then on-field, she's one of the better options. Like yes, Alhaitham is a better Dendro carry on-field, and I believe Alhaitham is also a really strong unit, but he doesn't fill the same role that Nahida does, as Nahida is a better driver if you just want Dendro application, while also being the meta-defining off-field support for any Dendro team comp. Dendro team comps like Hyperbloom, generally speaking, have a very low bar of entry. Like even just a 4-star Hyperbloom team can clear the current Abyss and do very well, provided you are building and leveling your characters, but obviously it won't be as strong strong as Nahida. Hyper Bloom teams are just really good in general, and while they aren't dependent on Nahida, those teams in particular not only will get a lot better with her, but the same can be said about pretty much any Dendro team at all, where there are other options you can use if you don't want to pull for her, but she will almost always be a considerable upgrade and the best option. And something worth noting is that Nahida's really fast Dendro application is something that is sort of needed in a few teams that have a lot of, let's say, Hydro or Electro, or for example, like a Burgeon or Hyper Bloom team, where if you don't have enough Dendro, then you're going to lose your Dendro uptime, lose your reactions, and just be a worse team overall, which is why in some Burgeon teams, you might see people without Nahida, for example, running like 2 Dendro characters, and the same can be said with some other teams, whereas with Nahida, you can typically just use her as your solo Dendro because she gives you so much Dendro application. Now keep in mind, this isn't always the case, and some teams can be perfectly fine replacing her or running less Dendro, like for example, Quicken or Aggravate teams, but my point is that in those teams, Nahida is still usually the best option, and then when you need more Dendro, Nahida can apply enough Dendro for like 2 other characters, or to sustain a team that needs a lot of Dendro application from either off-field or on-field, depending on how much you actually need. And so to conclude on this section, because I really don't want to repeat myself, let me say the following. While I don't think anyone should feel forced to pull for Nahida, as you can just use another Dendro support like the main character if you choose to skip her, I do want to say that pulling for her is something that I don't think anyone will regret as long as you are using Dendro teams and you do enjoy those Dendro teams. This is because power level wise, she's insane, giving you energy, damage, Dendro application, and being able to be used from either on or off field. She has basically 100% uptime on her elemental skill, good buffs from her burst and passives, and being generally the best character to use as an off-field Dendro support in basically any team that wants a Dendro support character. So I hope I did a good job at explaining this nuance. Like, everyone's going to be calling her a must pull, and meta-wise, she is definitely up there as one of the best characters to pull for, and the most versatile ones as well. But I do want to reiterate my belief that no character is a must pull in Genshin Impact, although Nahida is definitely as close as it gets, as she is broken, but as I said, you can clear all content in the game without her, so keep that in mind. Now moving on, another thing I want to talk about is her pull value when compared to other characters. Well, first of all, Nilou, who's also on the banner, is a character who benefits very well from Nahida. So when people ask me, hey, should I pull for Nahida or Nilou? Well, I will make a rerun video for Nilou, so stay tuned for that, coming out shortly after this video. Nilou is a perfect example of a character who gets much better with Nahida. Nahida's pull value for you depends on the teams you're using, as if you're not running any Dendro teams, then you might not even use Nahida, whereas if you're running pretty much any team with a Dendro character, then Nahida is going to be an amazing option. Nilou is a character who is pretty good in her niche, but who gets significantly better if you have Nahida on your account, as most of Nilou's teams are just better with Nahida. Also, when compared to the other Archon characters, while Raiden has some really strong meta teams, Venti has content where he's really good, and Zhongli is nice if you have a shield, and all 3 of the Archons have their role and are pretty strong characters. Nahida's, in my opinion, and also just meta-wise, the best Archon, as Dendro teams are pretty broken right now, especially with Nahida, who elevates the bar and the damage ceiling of pretty much all Dendro teams. If that wasn't enough, Nahida is also a very accessible character in the sense that she's amazing at C0 and very flexible with her builds, which I'll cover very shortly. But first I want to say that yes, while she is broken at C0, there is also an upgrade path. Like if you want her second constellation, this is one of the strongest second constellations in the game, so she becomes even more broken. But since she's so good baseline as a character, I don't think this is one that you need, in case you're wondering. And now, since we're finally going to talk about her builds, I do actually want to say that yes, there are many different ways to build her, which means it's a lot easier to farm for her since there are many different stats that you can go and many different weapons that you may already have for your Nahida. To start things off with your artifacts, Deepwood Memories is an amazing supportive set for your Nahida to give her damage but also give your team damage by decreasing the Dendro resistance of enemies. You can get this while farming for Gilded Dreams for another character in your team, as Dendro teams typically run a character on Gilded as well. Nahida can also use this set or mix and match 2 pieces if another party member that you're using already has a 4-piece Deepwood. If that wasn't enough for her artifact stats, this is where things get really flexible, as well you want Elemental Mastery for your Sands. For your Goblet and Circlet, going for either Elemental Mastery or damage / crit are all going to be viable options and are similar in strength to one another. This means that you can pick based on your substats or whichever one you get first while farming for your characters. Now, the exact strength of Elemental Mastery versus crit, like the exact, I guess, difference or breakpoint of which one's better, depends on many factors, like if you're running your Nahida on or off field, but generally they're very similar up until your Nahida gets 1000 Elemental Mastery. What I mean by this is up until your first 1000 effective EM, and by effective I mean factoring in any external buffs of EM, like your passive talent or an artifact set, Elemental Mastery and crit are about as strong as one another. The reason for this is because your first 1000 Elemental Mastery will also be converted into crit and damage bonus for your Nahida, while also being just a good stat to have for your reaction damage and also for the shared Elemental Mastery that your burst will give your active party member. While EM is a bit more valuable in certain teams like a Nilou Bloom team, generally speaking, just know that she's very flexible and that both EM and crit or damage percent are all going to be viable options for your Nahida, making her very easy to build. If that wasn't enough, she has amazingly accessible catalyst options in the sense that yes, she has really good 5 stars and 4 stars, but also really good free-to-play options. Since she's a character who scales on EM and crit, base attack isn't going to be the biggest deal. Yes, attack still matters for her, but since it's not her primary stat, this means that a weapon like even the magic guide can be a really good free-to-play option because it gives you elemental mastery and an effect that just increases your damage significantly. This is only relevant though if you can maintain the magic guide's effect when using Nahida with either a hydro or electro character. The magic guide is usually similar in strength to the other free-to-play option, the Mappa Mare, with which one being better depending on the team you're running and how you're playing your Nahida, but both are typically about as good. And then there's obviously clear upgrades here if you have better options, like for example the Widsith for an insane amount of damage when its passive is up, giving you either attack percent, elemental damage, or elemental mastery, while also having crit damage on its effect. The Widsith not only is a good stat stick, but is also better in practice than it is on paper, as you're getting 10 seconds of really high damage where the Widsith will be your best option, which makes it good for either speed clearing content or for a good amount of front-loaded burst damage. This is great for places like the Abyss, provided you know how to make use of a buff like this and have an efficient rotation where you're doing good damage in this window. That wasn't enough. Weapons like Solar Pearl, Sacrificial Fragments, or even in certain really weird niche cases, the Prototype Ember can be viable options depending on what you want on your Nahida, with all of the 5-star options also being good. Generally speaking though, her signature weapon, the Thousand Floating Dreams, is still her best in slot both on and off field, but it is replaceable and it's not as big of a DPS increase as other characters' signature weapons can be. Since this is a video talking about her rerun and her weapon banner will be out at the same time as her, I figured I should address whether her weapon is worth pulling for, and it depends. I personally am not the biggest fan of this catalyst because the Kagura's Verity, which is a more flexible weapon since it doesn't just give you elemental mastery and can be used on other characters as well, is about as good as the Teapot and can actually be better sometimes on field, with them both being very similar in strength on your Nahida, making it to where I would probably rather pull for another weapon or using a good catalyst option you might already have. For example, if you have a good 5-star option or a good 4-star option like Widsith, especially with refinements, then you can just use that and save your primos. But that doesn't mean that her signature weapon is bad. It's still good. It's just not my favorite in terms of primo gem efficiency, especially because a lot of other catalyst characters may not want to use this weapon if your Nahida isn't the one equipping it. And next up for her teams, to show you guys how flexible she is, as I said, she's pretty much the best option in any Dendro team. And while this can depend, like sometimes you can use Yao Yao if you also want a healer, or you could use Alhaitham for a stronger on-field carry if that's what you're looking for. Nahida's role as a support is pretty much second to none. You can use her in a Hyperbloom team from off-field or even on-field as a driver if your other characters can't be the ones normal attacking. She can also be used alongside a carry like an Electro carry for a Keqing Aggravate team, or a Dendro carry for an Alhaitham spread team or Quick Bloom team if you're also proccing Hyperbloom, which is a team that is pretty much only possible because of the fact that you have a lot of Dendro application from both your Alhaitham and your off-field support like Nahida. Same can be said for like Sino or any other Electro carry or any other Dendro carry, and other team comps like Burgeon obviously want Nahida. Same can be said for a Nilou Bloom team, which again I'll cover more in my next video, but Nilou and Nahida together are really powerful. And yes, you can still run 2 Dendro characters here, like you can replace a Hydro option with someone like Yao Yao once again, but Nahida is still going to be the best option in this team. Now there are some more obscure teams where you can use her as well, like a Ganyu Burnmelt team, and just overall, as you can see, Nahida is just so flexible of a character, having her place in pretty much any meta defining Dendro team as a really good supportive option. And so yeah, those are my thoughts on Nahida. Genuinely one of the strongest characters right now, one of the most important characters to get for your account meta wise if that's something you care about. Keep in mind, Genshin's a gacha game, so save your primo gems for characters that you like and will actually be using, but if Nahida is a character that interests you, then definitely feel free to pull for her, as I believe she's broken, genuinely speaking. But again, I don't believe must pulls are a thing because of the fact that the Abyss floor 12 is the hardest content we have, and that is clearable even without the most meta of characters. So yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If there's anything I want to add, it will be in a pinned comment. I want to try to keep this review pretty brief, but I do hope that I included everything that you needed to know and answered all of your questions. If you're new, feel free to subscribe to catch my newest videos as they come out live, as new account reviews as well as my Nilou review will be out shortly if that's something that interests you. And I do also want to mention that I do stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested. But with all that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace. Okay, you guys want to see something broken? You guys want to see something broken? Watch this. Watch this. You want to see something broken? Watch this. Yeah, that shit is broken.